so I find myself in the Magic Johnson Enterprises office conducting a due diligence session for the acquisition of this potential company. And halfway through this meeting, I hear a knock on the door, and it's Irvin. And so Magic walks in, says hello, and just sits down. And he's like, continue doing what you're doing. People don't want to think about life insurance typically because it requires thinking about sort of your mortality. If I can use the product to help you live your best possible life, I think that's a win-win for everybody.
Welcome to the Leader's Edge podcast. I'm Zach Ewell, content producer here at Leader's Edge. In this episode, Associate Editor Chris Hand interviews Ryan Smith, Executive Vice President of Atlanta Life Insurance Company. During this vibrant conversation, Smith shares how his entrepreneurial mindset as a child led him to business school, then working with NBA legend Magic Johnson, and how he ended up in the insurance industry. Give it a listen.
We were just talking about your experience working with Magic Johnson and the Magic Johnson Enterprise in Los Angeles. I'm quite sure you're the first insurance executive I've interviewed for personal lines who can say that.
That sounds likely.
So tell me about that experience. You took me through it a little bit before we started recording, but tell me about how you got there and just what it was like to work with Magic Johnson on a daily basis.
No, Chris, absolutely. And so I guess the genesis of the story starts with sort of my career prior to that. And so it was all through the lens of finance and investing. So stops at Morgan Stanley in investment banking, stops in private equity with a shop called IMB Partners, and then to San Francisco to do venture capital with a firm called Bronze Investments. Specific to IMB Partners as well as Bronze Investments, sort of the thread there was double bottom line impact. And so either acquiring or investing in companies that not only generate a profit, but also materially improve people's lives for the better. And so was doing both venture capital and pursuing my MBA at Stanford back in sort of the 2012 to 2014 range. And so thought about putting those experiences together and sort of this life mission I have of using business, using capital investment to materially improve people's lives, and how to do that on a large platform and in sort of the optimal way. And had been monitoring Magic Johnson Enterprises for probably the past 2 decades prior, and had saw how he carved out and proved the hypothesis about the opportunities to do business in inner city communities. And sort of the thesis was rooted in this idea of, despite those communities often having sort of lower per capita income, they also have greater density and they're ignored. And so there's significant demand without the supply. And if you cater to those communities, you will do well as a business, but also the community will benefit and they will appreciate you. And so figured out, or tried to determine how to get in contact. So it's one thing to have an idea, right? It's like, hey, get in contact with Magic Johnson. Who in my network knows Magic Johnson? No one. All right, back to the drawing board. Fortunately, LinkedIn had come around at this point. And so, all right, let's see who at Magic Johnson Enterprises is on LinkedIn. All right, start looking at people. Nope, don't know anyone here. That's not great. And then sort of thinking about my previous stops at Bronze and at IMB, it's like, hey, once upon a time, we were trying to do a transaction with MJE. Let's see if perhaps I've been on an email with someone at MJE before. And so started typing Magic Johnson Enterprises and different names into my various inboxes. And lo and behold, something actually came up. And so it was the name of a gentleman named Eric Holloman. He was president of MJ at the time. Okay. And it wasn't in a business context. Funny enough, I had a fellowship when I was in business school, and he sat on the board of the fellowship. Oh. And so I emailed the director of the fellowship and said, hey, do you mind making an introduction to this gentleman, Eric Holloman? And they're like, sure, why not? And I'm like, essentially the argument is, for sort of the value prop is, there's a gentleman who believes in your investment thesis, has already invested in the areas you invest and more, and is a Stanford MBA currently, and will do the first deal for free. And so the objective there was to make it impossible to say no. And so that's what I was attempting to do. That was serendipitous. So they made the introduction. This gentleman, Eric, at that moment, sort of felt the strain of sort of limitless opportunity, right? And so as a one-person team, there are just limitations by sheer hours of the day. And there are compelling things that you should probably look at that you don't have time. And so that was one of these moments. And he's like, actually, I have something that I'd like you to look at, and sent me the materials. And we talked in days, and I gave him my opinion. He said, all right, can you be in LA next week? And I said, sure, why not? And so I find myself in the Magic Johnson Enterprises office conducting a due diligence session for the acquisition of this potential company. And halfway through this meeting, I hear a knock on the door, and it's Irvin. And so Magic walks in, says hello, and just sits down at the table with me, the entrepreneur, Eric. And he's like, continue doing what you're doing. I'm like, all right. And so continue the meeting. Fast forward.
That had to be a little unnerving.
It was interesting, but fortunately I had sort of put in the reps, and I'm pretty good at like handling pressure. And so it went well. I made my recommendation, which was actually to go in a different direction and not pursue the acquisition. That built rapport, that built trust. Shortly thereafter, there became an opportunity to acquire a WNBA team, the Los Angeles Sparks. So I flew back to Los Angeles, knocked out that transaction with Eric in 9 days. And then that further sort of started to cement things. And at that point, it's like, hey, I want you to come do this full time. And so that began a journey. And then shortly thereafter, that ended up being my foray into life insurance, because the third transaction or third opportunity that came up was the opportunity to acquire a life insurance company in Chicago called Equitrust.
And your allegiance to the Chicago Bulls didn't hinder this relationship?
I just tried to limit it, right? And so fortunately, he's a good sport. And understands that, to me, MJ growing up meant Michael Jordan.
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah. And, we just try and sort of walk around the edges of that conversation. But obviously, he has tremendous respect for Michael, and Michael vice versa. And so there are some moments in jest, but he gets it. And I've now attended many a Lakers game with him. So.
Okay. All right.
And funny enough, to this day, I've not met Michael Jordan, but I've spent many hours with Irvin. So,
all right.
So we can posit that sort of inverted, and now MJ to me is Magic.
That's right. All right. You grew up. You have worked in Chicago and LA and San Francisco and now Atlanta, but you grew up in Chicago. And you told me your experience growing up there in the southeast side of Chicago. And I'm not going to remember exactly what you said, but basically shaped your worldview. Tell me how growing up in that neighborhood did that.
Yeah, so if I think about it in a number of ways, right? So specific to my household, 2 loving parents and 4 siblings, and we all love and take care of each other. But we sort of think about it outside of the household, and it was a neighborhood that had gone through many periods of transition, right? And so if we think about sort of the late 80s, early 90s, that ends up being sort of a drug pandemic. And then sort of things got cleaned up a bit, and so the neighborhood started to improve. But within all of that, saw a number of people whose lives didn't turn out as they wanted and desired. And that could be by way of sort of their education not being completed. That could be incarceration. That could be sort of being the victim of violence. And also sort of seeing my trajectory as sort of a benefactor of limited opportunity. And like one thing I've like noticed throughout my life is that a number of places I've gone, like people are there with their friends and sort of have carried each other through the journey. And that just wasn't sort of the reality of many within my neighborhood. And kids that I grew up with, spent every day with playing outside, didn't have that same fortune, didn't have that same luck. And so thinking about sort of an old sort of African proverb, which is if you want to go far, go alone. If you want to go far, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. and sort of thinking about, all right, sort of how do I turn that into sort of a life philosophy and create opportunities whereby that's true. And so thought about ways to start to address the socioeconomic issues within communities like mine on the south side of Chicago, or in New Jersey, where my mother's from, Plainfield, to name your city, right? And thought about it through a nonprofit lens, even sort of created a nonprofit focused on sort of young men who made it out of these communities, going back and pouring into the young men in those communities. And like that felt great, but that wasn't what I would consider a scalable solution. But you feel good, you change the impact or sort of life trajectory of a few kids. But like, how do we do this holistically and also take care of parents and families? And so like the way I sort of hypothesize that would be true is business, but businesses that have a social orientation and a double bottom line, and actually create opportunities, create employment, engage with their communities within these communities. And so, all right, it's like, all right, that's nice, but how do you then go execute on that? And so first had to learn how business actually works. And so went to college, studied business, specifically finance. Then I went to New York, joined Morgan Stanley, and that allowed me to work on sort of finance, capital, and business and strategy at the highest level. And so I get to see how things work at the highest levels. And then it became time to sort of bring the idea, hypothesis together. And so I started telling people about this vision. They told me to go meet a gentleman named Torres Richardson. We met, and he had been building something similar for countless years prior to, and it's about to start building his new thing. And he said, why don't you join me on this journey, and I'll show you the ropes and, you know, send you on your way. And that was great, because that actually started to give me the structure and chassis for going about this vision and sort of focusing on building businesses that cater to the underserved and underrepresented. And then started thinking about, all right, sort of where is innovation happening, and sort of where the best idea is coming from. And at that time, Silicon Valley had turned the corner at the dot-com boom or bust. Yeah. And there were a lot of interesting things that were starting to occur. And the way that technology companies are financed is venture capital. And so I wanted to learn more about that. And so initially was going to use business school to transition. But I ended up actually getting an opportunity right before I was supposed to start business school and venture capital. And it was a similar story with a gentleman named Stephen DeBerry, who had built a career investing in early stage companies that materially improve the lives of individuals. And so that's a lot of ed tech, fintech, and healthcare, but also went to business school simultaneously. And so got my MBA from Stanford. And then, like I told you before, that journey coalesced, and that turned into the opportunities at Magic Johnson Enterprises, which turned into the opportunity at Equitrust Life Insurance, which ultimately turned into the opportunity at Atlanta Life Insurance Company.
You have, you know, you mentioned serendipity before, but it also sounds like it also kind of sounds like a situation where you created your own luck, because you had a very clear idea of what you wanted to do, and then you found, it sounds like, some mentors who helped you do what you wanted to do. Is that fair?
That's 100% fair. And like, it sounds like a smooth, sort of straightforward journey now, but it was not without its bumps and like moments of doubt. But when I got to Morgan Stanley, I had an incredible mentor named Carla Harris. And the funny thing is that I didn't understand sort of who Carla Harris was at the time, but my brother had a good friend whose like mentee had just started working at Morgan Stanley. And so it's like, hey, if you go to this building, say hi to him. And so I'm standing in the elevator bank and we're talking, and this woman gets off the elevator and he's like, hey, I want you to meet someone. This is Carla Harris, Carla, Ryan, Carla. And then he's like, hey, this is the guy I was telling you about. She says breakfast tomorrow, 8:30, and walks away. And and he then says, do you know who that is? And I said, nope, aside from her name being Carla. And that became the first time someone told me to Google someone, like Google being a verb. And so went to Google her, and it's like, you know, top 50 most powerful women on Wall Street, sold out Carnegie Hall, 3 Christmas albums. And so I'm like, well, I guess I'll be at breakfast tomorrow at 8:30. And so showed up to breakfast. The the next day at 8:30. And funny enough, I was new to corporate America and didn't fully understand how it worked. And to put this in context, or to make this very specific, I had my earrings in my ear at the time. And she's like, hey, you should take out your earrings. No one's going to tell you, but it's not part of the culture. And then she proceeded to give me what have now turned into books, but they were Carla's Pearls of Wisdom. And so she would give me her counsel. She would check in. She would help me understand the business and how I should be proceeding through it. And that was a priceless journey. And then from there, it became Taurus, and Taurus taught me a lot about sort of what I was trying to do. And then it became Stephen, then it became Irvin and Eric. And so have been incredibly fortunate in terms of people actually understanding, caring about sort of my hope, my vision, my sort of purpose, and pouring into it. And so it's been a fortunate journey.
Bounce all over the place here. So I'm going back to childhood. You told me earlier how you kind of developed an entrepreneurial spirit at a very young age. And I want to ask you about that. If you could recall some of what you were telling me.
Yes, so I was a entrepreneurial and enterprising kid, and so to put this in context, I'm
going to interrupt. Where did that come from?
I'm the youngest of five, and so my older brother, essentially, when I'm coming of the age of sort of like truly becoming a human, sort of really getting into school and developing personality, he was joining the workforce. He had graduated college. And so he would then have me read things he was reading. And like this love for reading actually comes from our mother. Like I hated reading when I was a child, but now I try and get through at least like 40 books a year. And so he would have me read books like Rich Dad, Poor Dad, or he would have me sort of go on Yahoo Finance and create sort of stock portfolios. And so that sort of got my mind sort of commercially oriented. And so every day, like my parents would make me a lunch, and they didn't realize every day I would go to school, my parents would make me a lunch. And apparently they didn't realize that I didn't have a sweet tooth. And so I would just take whatever dessert or sweet they put in, and I would barter it with other kids for like other things. It could be like $1, or it could be like a non-sweet snack. And then my mother was also a computer teacher. And so we were one of sort of the first like households to like get like dial-up internet. And so at the time, people always people love music. They want to know the words to the songs that they listen to, and you can read the song book in your CD at the time, or you just make up words. And I had a solution for that. And that was leveraging the lyric websites that were part of sort of Web 1.0. And so I'd say, hey, tell me your favorite songs. I'll bring the lyrics to you tomorrow. Just give me $1. And so that was part of it. And then like looking at sort of bartering these sweets and saying, all right, my fellow students really like these. Hey, Dad, can you take me to the like wholesale store? And I'll just buy a big bag of these that cost me, call it $10, but I have 30 pieces and I'll sell them for $1 each, and then I have a $20 profit. And so I can then go buy another bag of these. And
you were filling a gap that was not being otherwise filled.
Exactly. And so it was, I guess, investing at an early age.
That's great. I'm wondering about, because you've been obviously in different industries, but your entry into insurance, what surprised you the most about the industry?
Probably that I ended up in it first and foremost. So it was.
This was not a childhood aspiration.
It was not. It was not on my roadmap, But upon discovering it, like one, it reminded me of a lot of previous stops in my journey, right? And so implicit and insurance, multi-trillion-dollar industry are a lot of the same elements and dynamics of like when I was on Wall Street, when I was doing private equity, when I was doing venture, like investment is a key component of it. But the more interesting part to me was realizing that sort of, I would call insurance as an entity to be sort of neutral, right? And you can utilize it to take advantage of policyholders, or you can actually utilize it to empower policyholders and make it into a social good. And that's what I liked. And so like with Equitrust, a big focus is annuities, right? And the way we think about that is longevity insurance. A lot has been sort of talked about with regard to sort of the retirement crisis. And this provides a way for people to not outlive their money, right? And not have sort of deep sort of deteriorations in their quality of life in their twilight years. And then if you think about life insurance, like there is natural alignment between the life insurance company and the policyholder. Both do best when the policyholder lives as long as possible and has the highest quality of life. And so the way I think about this is this is a way for me to encourage financial protection, but also just overall wellness. And I mean that mental, physical, and financial. And so if I can invest in you to ensure you're living your longest and most high quality of life possible, then that's a win for everybody. And so that's how I think about it. And also I think about it from a sort of wealth building tool and sort of ensuring that your family is taken care of. And so I'll put this in context. When Atlanta Life was first created in 1905, our founder, Mr. Herndon, who's behind me in a picture, he created it because there were a number of families who didn't have the money to give their loved ones that last dignified moment, and that's a burial, right? And so what they would do to try and raise those funds is host a Friday fish fry. And we fast forward 119 years later, and we still have the equivalent, and it's GoFundMe's. And why do we have the same problem 120 years later? And it's one thing to pay for a funeral, but then there are bills, or there's a family losing their primary sort of earner, and that has a deleterious effect on families and trajectory, and sort of not being able to provide the best future for the generations after you. And life insurance addresses that. And so all of those things, like these are things that I had never thought of. Like people don't want to think about life insurance typically because it requires thinking about sort of your mortality and thinking about, they call it the most selfless decision, right? And it's something that is going to be bestowed upon your family at your demise and that you'll never see the benefits of. And it's sort of one, rewriting that conversation, sort of imploring responsibility, but then there are also things that are beneficial while you're alive. And also, if I can use a product to help you live your best possible life, I think that's a win-win for everybody.
You've had, as you said, lots of really influential and instrumental mentors, and I'm wondering if you see yourself now as a mentor, and if you are conscious in terms of that role.
I am, and it's this idea of like understanding that I've been fortunate and the people who poured into me, and with that I have a responsibility to pour into others. And while I don't necessarily say like I have mentees, like I'm always happy to have a conversation, provide guidance, give feedback, and sort of do that in a number of ways, whether that's sort of a one-on-one conversation, if that's addressing a group, if that's doing something like this, like it's sharing the message, and also through building businesses, providing opportunity. And with any business I'm involved in, there'll be a significant sort of community engagement aspect of it. Like I believe in we are the communities we serve. And so it's pouring into that community and just like to what I just said, right? So extending that a bit further, this idea of like, I want you to live your longest and best quality of life. Like the reality of that is that that requires involvement very early on. And so like, what are the things you need? You need to be safe. You need a proper education. You need nutrition. You need opportunity. And then you need to like learn sort of physical fitness, wellness, and how to take care of yourself, right? And so it's, whether it be Atlanta Life specifically or the Herndon Foundation, which is the foundation of the founders of Atlanta Life and who are still equity owners of the company, it's sort of pouring into those more long tail things to sort of think about wellness, again, holistically.
That was Associate Editor Chris Hand interviewing Ryan Smith. I hope you enjoyed it. For more episodes of our Personal Lines podcast series, go to leadersedge.com or find our podcast on SoundCloud, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts.